chapter.
Don't worry, we're not going to restart our Mark study. Very thankful to see each one here today, as has already been mentioned. I've been looking forward to the day, desperately need the day. I'm reminded how much I need the continual gathering together of the church quite often. Seems like just by the time we finally get around to gathering together that I feel as though that I need it the most. And so I'm thankful for each of you. And every week I do say I'm thankful to see each one of you here, and it's not just because I've got somebody to preach to. It's more so that I'm just thankful to have fellowship with each of you. Y'all are an encouragement to me. So we'll begin in the book of Mark, chapter 1. Before we read, we will go to the Lord again in prayer. Dear God, we come to you this morning, and we do thank you so much that we have the opportunity to gather, that we have the ability to gather. And God, please help us to take advantage of this opportunity we've been given. I do know that there are many things that pry for our attention. There are many things on our mind, perhaps things that we have done through the course of the week or weekend, or things that we have coming up. But for this moment, I ask that you help us to fix all of our focus, all of our attention on your word and on the moving of your Spirit. Please help me to preach this morning. I do need your help, as always. I know that I can accomplish no good thing. I can't focus, I can't think, I can't speak, I can't even breathe without your allowing it. God, please help me today to please you, to honor and glorify you, to fulfill your will, and that I could be a vessel in which your will is accomplished and your word is taught. Please help us to humble ourselves, to be contemplative of our own selves, to look in the mirror and see where we might need to be changed. We do also pray, as always, for the lost, that they would see need to trust in you today. And it's in your wonderful and holy name that we pray, for you're so worthy. Amen. Mark chapter 1. We'll begin reading in verse 35. But before we read, I want you to take note of something. I know that we have studied the book of Mark, but I went back and checked. I think it took us from November of 2024 to June of 2026 to get through it. And so Mark chapter 1 was an awful long time ago. And with this chapter, it kind of goes along with the typical pace of Mark, which is very, very fast. So with this, that you can go back up in verse 21, and you can see that they come into Capernaum on the Sabbath day. And from there that Jesus goes into the synagogue and teaches, and from there that he heals one, or rather cast out a demon from someone who was possessed. And then it says in verse 29, when they came out of the synagogue, they entered into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. And Jesus then heals Peter's mother-in-law, who had laid sick of a fever. And from there, that evening comes around and the sun sets, and in verse 32, and it says, and they brought unto him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils. And so it says there that he healed many that were sick of divers diseases, and cast out many devils, and suffered not the devils to speak, because they knew him. And that will bring us now to verse 35. And it says, and in the morning, rising up a great while before the day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. And Simon and they that were with him followed after him. And when they had found him, they said unto him, all men seek for thee. And he said unto them, let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, for therefore came I forth. And he preached in their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and cast out devils. We went up and kind of recapped the chapter, because as you noticed, Jesus had a very busy day. And we started in verse 35 with him getting up in the morning, rising up a great while before the day, long before the sun rises, and he goes in a solitary place, it says, and prayed. And that is what I want us to look at this morning is spending time alone with God. We cannot possibly afford to underestimate or undervalue our time alone with God. It is something that we could get a microphone and pass it around this morning and ask the question, do you feel as though that you spend enough time alone with God? And most of us would say, no, but I know I need to. I know it's important. And yet it is that thing that we continually kick on down the road in favor of other things. And it's that thing that, again, we know we need to do better, but it seems as though that there's a whole bunch of reasons why we don't. And I want to convince us this morning of a truth that we already know, that time alone with God is important, but hopefully that it will not just motivate you for the morning and not just make you feel bad, but settle into our souls that all of us can go from here and address that issue, because it's an issue that needs addressing, and it's an issue that no one else can address but you. Your life probably isn't going to be changing all that substantially in terms of how you spend your time. That there are seasons of life that it changes, I understand, but it doesn't usually change too drastically. If you feel that you didn't have time last week, you probably won't think that you have any more time this coming week or the week following. And if you haven't had energy for the past couple of months, then guess what? Tomorrow morning, you're probably not going to magically have more energy. And yet, the issue is yours to resolve. God is there waiting for you to come to Him. It is not an issue of us waiting for Him. The issue is on you. Time alone with God is important. Alone time in general, there's two ways that we can look at time alone, with or without God. But time spent by yourself. Now, some of you this morning, if I talk about alone time, you might laugh at that. Alone time? Well, what is that? As you can imagine, that we've entered into a stage of life in which, I used to have alone time, and I don't have alone time anymore. It's my wife. I'm sure that she looks forward to me coming home. That way, she can get 5 seconds to go to the bathroom by herself without somebody beating on the door. Alone time is a luxury for many people. For a lot of us, it is the most valuable time that we have because we have so little of it. And life is pulling us in every direction. It demands so much from us. In the morning, tomorrow morning, I'll get up and I'll go to work. And I will get probably no more than a 30-minute stretch at a time to actually do my work. There's going to be phone calls and meetings and site visits and things. And it'll be like that every single day. And it's hectic, and then I'll get home, and again, I have responsibilities at home. I have a wife that I'm a husband to. I have children that I'm a father to. They demand my attention. And even if I'm going to do something that I need to do, a lot of times I'm dragging them along with me. Me and Silas was working on the porch a couple months ago. As you can imagine, he was very helpful. Now, alone time, super valuable for some of us, super limited. And yet, there's a need for us to carve out some of that time and dedicate that time to God. But alone time for some others that are here, that you may hear that and think it's complaining. Do not misunderstand. That's not a complaint on my behalf. I'm thankful that the stage of life that we're in is the way that it is, because I do understand, and I have seen many that as they get later in life, that alone time is about the only time they got. And for you, instead of the most valuable time, it may be the most difficult time that you have. That loneliness is a very overwhelming trial. Whenever I was able or used to paint, that we would paint a lot of nursing homes, and it was some of the hardest decisions to make in the world, because I have a job to do. In every room you walk in, somebody's just so eager to talk to somebody. And so I don't want to, rule out any scenario. For some of you, you have no alone time and you wish you had more. For others, you may have all the alone time in the world and wish you didn't have it. However, in either case, whether it's at a premium or whether you're overcome by sorrow because of how much alone time you have, there is a responsibility and a demand that you utilize that time for God, that you utilize that time to go to God and study. That if your Bible study it only takes place whenever I stand in front of you to teach you, or whenever one of our Sunday school teachers stands in front of you to teach you, if your only Bible study is, even if you're very dedicated to be here, Sunday school, now three lessons on Sunday outside of that. So you got 4 opportunities on Sunday, Wednesday night, Friday night, once or twice a month. And even if you go to all the youth sings, there's another opportunity, but that's not nearly enough. If that's the only study time you get, you don't get enough study time. And you need to dedicate that time to study, and you need to dedicate that time to meditation. Meditating is hard. Our minds wander. Every one of us has stuff going on, or things that we wish we were doing, and all of those things race into our minds all the time. But God wants us to meditate on His Word day and night. It says that we mull it over in our minds, that we contemplate what it means, how it ought to change our direction, how it ought to affect us, how that it affects others. And you need to do that alone. If you do that only surrounded by other people, there will be a whole bunch of different distractions to pop up. If that time, as Jesus used it here, it needs to be spent in prayer. If the only time you spend in prayer is whenever we come together and pray as a church, you don't pray enough. And so that alone time, that it needs to be dedicated to prayer. And as I say these things, you're kind of like checking it and looking at it, and you're thinking, my goodness, this is a lot of time. And you are correct. That is why Jesus rose up a great while before the sun rose. That is why He did this very frequently, late into the night and early in the morning, because His day was spent surrounded by others who needed Him. Time alone with God is as necessary to a child of God as breathing is, as eating, as sleeping. It is the most important time that we have. That's why in the Scriptures you can go and you can read verses that tell you things like pray without ceasing, or it tells you to praise God always, to always be thankful. You can go to the Psalms and you can read a whole bunch of verses about seeking God always and all of these things. And whenever we read that our minds may tend to go and say, all right, I need to pray always like in every situation, and you do. Or I need to pray always like that I need to make sure that I don't shy away from prayer, that I'm not ashamed of prayer, and that is the case. But praying always also means that you pray when you're by yourself. It is as necessary, again, as breathing. Whenever you look at the child of God's life is supposed to be a ministry. I'm going to probably use that word a lot this morning. Ministry, a life of ministry. And whenever I say life of ministry, I don't want you to think just my life. If you're saved, it's your life. Whether you're a licensed minister, an ordained minister, a deacon, a teacher, regardless, your life is the life of a minister. We are all servants. We are all ministers on God's behalf in this world. And a life of ministry is spent of constant outpouring. You're constantly pouring things out. And this is something from a perspective that I've been able to get. I guess what I'm trying to say is I've been able to get a different perspective on this since the Lord has called me into the ministry to preach. And growing up, that I was able to have opportunity to teach from a pretty young age, and I thank God for that time. There's a lot of good training. And with that I was able to kind of gradually work my way into things. I had opportunity to preach to teach a class on Wednesday nights. And eventually I was given the opportunity, changing from there, to teach on a Sunday school class on Sunday mornings. And being able to teach once a week, that was a very great difficulty. It's tough. For those of you who teach every week, you understand. It's tough to teach every week. But I got to balance that by being preached to. I got to balance that out by Sunday morning and Sunday evening and being preached to by our pastor. That I was being poured into as I was pouring out. Well, now, that's different from my practice. I get to minister to on Sunday mornings in Bible school or Sunday school. And I thank God for that. I need to be taught. And it's good to be taught. It's good to have somebody else pouring into me. But there's a lot more that flows out from me in terms of teaching than what flows into me. And I don't say this to complain. Certainly don't say it to poke my chest out. What I'm getting at is I've been able to experience now to an extreme degree in which it feels like I pour out a whole lot and very little comes in. And whenever that happens, it gets very difficult to pour out. Whenever I find times in my life that I've neglected time alone with God, you have suffered for it. Because there has been less to give to you. I pour out and I pour out and I pour out, and if I'm not putting in, nothing can come out. And for those times, I do apologize. But from your perspective, again, just my teaching to you is not enough. I know I can be awfully long-winded, and still it's not enough. And so if you're pouring out and ministering the way that you are supposed to, you will find that if you're not spending time alone with God, not enough is coming in. If there's more going out than what's coming in, basic math is going to tell you you're going to run dry. And if you run dry, you're an unprofitable servant to God. And that's never the place that we want to find ourselves. So a life full of outpouring, we need time alone with God. We need to gather those spiritual resources in order to give to others. And when we look at Jesus poured out more than any of us here ever could. His life was the life of a minister in every sense of the word. And that is why Jesus spent so much time alone with the Father. Verse 38 is a very special verse and a very ordinary verse to the Gospels, because to be honest with you, I could have picked from many verses in the Gospels to read from this morning to prove this point. That Jesus would spend time alone with God. He spent time alone with God in the Garden of Gethsemane. He spent 40 days alone with God and at Mark chapter 2, end of Mark chapter 1, somewhere here nearby. That we studied. He spent time alone with God at night, time alone with God in the morning. The disciples often wondered where Jesus ran off to. He went to be by himself with his Father. And that is the reason why. And if Jesus needed time alone with the Father, I think that speaks volumes to how much time we need alone with the Father. Because without time alone with God, we have nothing to give. This is the non-glamorous side of being a child of God. Whenever you think of influential ministers of God in the Bible, you might think of those. You can go to the Old Testament and you can read like of Elijah, one of the most influential men of God in all of history. The man didn't even die. It tells us a lot. And you can think of very clearly the prime example, Jesus. And you can think of those like Paul, those who have done so much and taught so much and been so many places. And they lived very glamorous lives. Elijah, called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, won the contest, so to speak, and went up with a chariot of fire. And Jesus, who performed all sorts of miracles, even in this chapter that we just glanced through, casting out demons, healing, walking on the water. You think of Paul, who shipwrecked so many different times on the island of Miletus, that he was bitten by a venomous serpent and nothing happened to him, and that doubtless proved with many signs and wonders, just as the disciples did, like Peter and John going to the temple to pray early in the book of Acts, and they heal a man who was lame. And You think of all these spectacular things. And you may even look beyond that and say, well, I'm not even looking for all these miracles to be done, just to be a good teacher. You can look and, my goodness, like you can, if you go read in Acts chapter 7, the sermon that Stephen preached, it was phenomenal. In Acts 17, Paul on Mars Hill, excellent. And you can read in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost what Peter would stand and preach. And these are things that, of course, inspired by God, but very clearly preached and taught with power. That's the glamorous side. The non-glamorous side is rising up a great while before the sun and going to be alone with God. And the non-glamorous side is Elijah spending days alone in the wilderness, trying to figure out what in the world was going on and trying to seek the will of God. The non-glamorous side, you can go, and we will, Galatians chapter 1, if you would turn. Galatians chapter 1. We'll begin in verse 11. Galatians 1 and verse 11, it says, "But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by revelation of Jesus Christ. For ye have heard of my conversation in time past in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it, and profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in mine own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen, immediately I conferred it not with flesh and blood, neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again unto Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days. So whenever we read of Paul, in your mind, Paul's ministry, very glamorous conversion in Acts chapter 9, I understand. But from there, you think, okay, then he took off. You know, he went to Jerusalem shortly thereafter. And from there, that did some great teachings, pretty miraculous escape from Jerusalem, and went all over the world teaching. But it says that he went 3 years to be alone with God. That he went to Arabia and returned again unto Damascus, and then after 3 years he came to Jerusalem. That was 3 years that many may think wasted. Many may think that that time was time that Paul could have valuably used to go and start his ministry a little bit earlier. Imagine if Paul had 3 more years well, those 3 years in Paul's life were probably the most important 3 years in which he went to be alone with God, to understand God, to see the character of God, to understand the will of God, and to be made strong. That way the rest of his life he had something to lean on. Whenever you go and you read in the book of 2 Timothy, for instance, that there's a very motivating verse of Scripture there that Paul writes to Timothy, and he goes on and he says that I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. That I know that all these other people are ashamed, all these other people are leaving the ministry, all these other people are finding hardships, all these other people are turning away from God, but I know who I have believed. Why was that the case? Because he spent time alone with God. That's how he knew God. Time alone with God is where you understand the will and the character of God. And without that time, you will go away. We're going to turn and read some of the Psalms, beginning in Psalm 62. Psalm 62. In verse 1. We're going to bounce around the Psalms here. Psalm 62 and verse 1. It says, "Truly my soul waiteth upon God. From Him cometh my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved." Truly, it says in verse 1, my soul waiteth upon God. Truly my soul waiteth upon God. That is, David would write here that David lived a very glamorous life. Very glamorous life. David did a whole lot of things. David earned a whole lot of songs that there were many people who sung. Saul is slain his thousands, but David is 10,000s. We could go and we could talk all day about the life of David, but David spent time alone with God, doing super important things like, being the king of God's chosen people and delivering God's chosen people from the hands of Goliath, and going out to war and saving up and starting to acquire resources to build the temple, all that super important stuff that David did. But he writes, my soul waiteth upon God, because from Him cometh my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. And that scene in verse 1 of waiting upon God, that there is very clearly a connotation of spending time alone with God. You can go into Psalm 63 and verse 1, another psalm of David. And he says, "O God, Thou art my God. Early will I seek Thee. My soul thirsteth for Thee. My flesh longeth for Thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see Thy power and Thy glory, so as I have seen Thee in the sanctuary. Because Thy loving kindness is better than life. My lips shall praise Thee. Thus will I bless Thee while I live. I will lift up mine hands in Thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness. My mouth shall praise Thee with joyful lips when I remember Thee upon my bed and meditate on Thee in the night watches. Because Thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of Thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after Thee. Thy right hand upholdeth me." He says, "Early will I seek Thee." And he says that he found strength and that he found satisfaction when he remembered God upon his bed and meditated on Him in the night watches. Early in the morning and late at night, David was found spending time alone with God. And because of that, he had unshakable faith. Because of that, he shall not be moved. Because of that, he was situated firmly upon the rock of Jesus Christ. Whenever you spend time alone with God, you understand the character of God. That's the only way that you understand the character of God in its fullness. It's much like human relationship. You see, you can take, for instance, me and my own wife, and for those of you who are married, you understand this as well, that I've known Haley pretty much forever. As most of you know, we were born a day apart. We were born in the same hospital room. We spent time in the nursery together. We were in the same kindergarten class together. I've known her my whole life. But I certainly didn't know her nearly like I know her now. And a lot of that was, we spent a lot of time around each other. Time in church, time at the youth sings, time in school, time in classes together. But we spent time around each other in groups. And then, of course, we began to date one another, as it should be. We didn't get a whole lot of alone time with one another. We did get some alone time, but it's usually out and about, And we got to know each other a little bit better. And then as we've been married and actually get time truly alone with one another, that we know each other even more. I understand her more, I understand her character more, and she mine. And the same is true as us and God. Sure, you can get a glimpse of the character of God. You can get an idea of the character of God. But until you go to be with Him by yourself, you'll never understand the depth of the character of God. You'll never understand the depth of the love of God, the depth of the seriousness of God, the compassion of God. You'll never understand Him until you behold His face alone. You'll never understand what the will of God is actually supposed to be until you seek God alone. And so we've well established that there is a great need to spend time with God alone, but I want you to understand also, because what is going to happen is you will find an excuse. We can come up with 1,000,001 excuses as to why we have failed to spend time alone with God the way that we should. every excuse is shattered when we look at the example of Christ. You can say, well, I would spend time alone with God, and I used to do a good job of it, but then this happened. But then I had kids, but then I got a new job, but then we got some grandchildren, but then we started this project around the house, but then we started doing this, but then I went back to school, but then whatever. Or I used to spend time alone with God, or I know I need to spend time alone with God, but I'm just so tired. I can't hardly get out of bed in the morning. I can't hardly stay up late at night. I'm just so tired. Or I would spend time alone with God, but there are so many important things going on that just suffers. There's no excuse. A lot of people will discount the example of Jesus, and this burns me up, and it burns me up because I have a tendency to do it too. Well, Jesus was God. It's not really a good example for us. It's not a fair example. But we spend a lot of time in the book of Mark talking about the humanity of Jesus. Jesus wore the same flesh that you wear. He had the same brain that you have. He had the same muscles that you have. Those muscles got tired. That brain got sleepy. It got overwhelmed. It got scattered. It got stressed. Jesus wore the same exact flesh you wear, and so Jesus is a prime example. And he is an example who did not fail to spend time alone with God, who did not allow excuse. If anybody could have had excuse, it would be Jesus, and yet we find no person who has ever spent so much time alone with God as he. You're not too busy. You're not. I'm not arguing that you're not busy. I'm not going to say you're not busy. You're busy. Some of you, I know the lives you live. I know some of the things going on. You're busy. I'm busy. Most of us are busy. But you're not too busy to be alone with God. When we look to the example of Jesus, there was no person as busy as Jesus. We talked about Mark chapter 1, how that he started by going into the synagogue on the Sabbath, and there he cast out a demon, and he left there and healed Peter's mother-in-law, and then a whole multitude of people gathered at evening when the sun went down, and he spent all evening, notice the sun had already gone down, by the way, so really all the night, healing, and then he got presumably a handful of hours of sleep, and a great while before the sun rose, he gets up and he goes and spends time alone with God, and then he says, let's go and keep on ministering. That's busy. But Mark chapter 1 wasn't a special day in the life of Jesus. Mark chapter 1 was the typical day of Jesus' life. You can find many times that he goes to try to be alone, and the multitudes follow him. He has to sneak away from them, but constantly, everywhere he went, he was totally surrounded by those asking for things, and he poured into them constantly. From sun up to sundown and beyond that, he was surrounded. So he made time elsewhere. You are not more busy than Jesus was, I can assure you. And there are not other things that are more important, no matter what those things may be. And there are really important things, really important. You will not find a bigger advocate for spending time with your family than me. That's an important thing. And so if you were to say, well, my time alone with God has suffered because I've gotten married and I feel that my wife deserves my attention. She deserves your attention. But that's no excuse. And it's not more important than the God who deserves your attention. And I have children to raise. I need to spend time with them. You do. And I have to work. God says if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. You do. And you might even say, well, I'm so busy preaching. There'll be others, I'm so busy preaching. I'm so busy teaching. I'm so busy working at the church. I'm so busy keeping up with the building. I'm so busy doing all these really important things. I'm so busy evangelizing. Super important things. None more important than you spending time alone with God. And I don't say that you need to take from those areas to spend time alone with God. I'm not saying that you need to neglect those responsibilities to spend time alone with God. What I'm saying is that you need to find somewhere else to spend time alone with God, because that place exists somewhere. There's something you do. There's some time that you spend that you can dedicate to spending time alone with God. No one has ever had a more important work than Jesus Christ. And again, no one spent more time alone with the Father than Jesus Christ. So you're not doing things you're not too busy. They're not things that are too important. You're not too tired. You're not too tired. There is nobody who spent more energy than Jesus Christ. He pushed his body beyond what is healthy. I want to define this word before I use it, the word reckless. I don't mean to say that Jesus did not contemplate his decisions. I don't mean to say that he did not think it through. Jesus knew that he was going to live a short life. He came here to live a short life. And so he used everything that he had. But the use of his body was reckless, in the sense that he drove it far beyond what is safe. He did this. He did this knowing that his life was going to be short. All right? But he really pushed the boundaries. Jesus was tired. I want you to read in Mark chapter 4. We've read this account, but in verse 35, if you would turn there, Mark chapter 4. In verse 35. Says, "And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him, even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was asleep on the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? An account you're very familiar with. And of course, you know that Jesus stands up and he calms the sea. But what I want you to understand, because there's a way you've pictured this scene in your mind. And that way is that there's this boat, and perhaps that Jesus went below decks and found this place to go sleep, or perhaps there was a cabin built that he went and he was laying in there. The boats that they used, they're somewhere about 30 foot long, roughly, and is wide open, just a platform. And they had some sails, and they had some gear. It would hold usually 10 to 15 people on average. That's the kind of boat. There was no cabin. There was no below decks. Wood was actually extremely expensive for them. As you could imagine, using hand tools. They didn't have no sawmill they could pull up and go cut some boards real quick. You know, it was a time-consuming process. And so that wood was pretty expensive. They didn't waste it on frivolities like cabins. It was more or less just a big open boat. And when you read this account, a great storm comes up. That seems to imply that there's a whole bunch of rain. And if not rain, it definitely says that there's a great storm of wind, which caused then the waves to get really choppy. If you've ever been on a choppy boat, it's hard to get much of any relaxation. And we're on nice, comfortable boats. And it says the waves are beating into the ship so that the ship is filling up with water. And so, yes, Jesus is asleep on he's at the back of the boat asleep. And he's asleep on a pillow, which is not going to be like a very comfortable pillow, probably just a bunch of old clothes or something all piled up together. And he's sleeping in a puddle of water, getting rained on, wind everywhere. These men are running all over this little tiny boat, throwing stuff overboard, stepping over them, probably stepping on them. And it says Jesus was asleep the whole time. I read this for you to see that Jesus was tired. This was not a place, an environment conducive to getting a little nap in. Again, he wasn't in some cabin asleep on a bed. He was in a little ragtag open boat full of water, soaking wet, stepped on, and he was asleep. As a testament to how much energy he spent in the ministry. So chapter 4 of the book of Mark, we recapped some of chapter 1. You kind of see how his day-to-day goes. He don't get much sleep. And this man was tired. In a man, we see the humanity of Jesus and how tired he was. You're not more tired than that. Ever. You're not more tired than what Jesus was consistently. But he found time to be alone with God. Jesus poured every ounce of energy he had into the ministry. You go to John chapter 4. For the sake of time, we won't turn to read it, but it's the woman at the well. And in John chapter 4, it says that the disciples come up to Samaria, and outside the city there's a well. And it says that Jesus sits by the well. And the whole reason, I guess the real reason is he knew that there was going to be a woman there he needed to witness to. But there was another reason, and that is that he did not have the energy to walk into the city that was within eyesight. They got to the outskirts of the city, and he didn't have the energy to go any further, so he sat down. And the disciples were going to go get some food and bring it back to him while he had a second to catch his breath. Jesus wasn't some old man. He's 30, 31, 32, somewhere around there. A young man in his prime. And he didn't have the energy to walk a little ways down into the city. But do you know what he then did? He, of course, ministered to this woman. And she goes and she brings a whole bunch of other people. So then they start coming and he is ministering to them. He's teaching them. He's casting out their demons. He's healing them. He's performing those miracles. And the disciples come back. And they're saying, Jesus, you were just so tired you didn't even have the energy to walk down into the city that's right here. Sit down and eat something. And he says, I have food to eat that you know not of. They were all confused by this. And somebody else must have gave him some food. But the food that he talked about was the spiritual nourishment of God the Father. That all that time he spent alone with God had enough to sustain him on I don't even know that he was standing. But he was tired and continued to pour in. But do you know what? I can guarantee that day he found time to be alone with his Father. And the same thing the next morning. He was dedicated to that singular task in life. Time alone with God is more valuable and more necessary than what you realize. And as a child of God, you need to be capable and willing of spending time alone with God. And I use both of those words, to be capable and to be willing. Are you capable of being alone with God? Well, in a broad sense, the answer is yes, anybody's capable. If you're a saved child of God, you're capable of being in the presence of God. But the problem is that we've conditioned ourselves to hate being alone with God. It's boring. There's other things that need to be done. You need to be capable, and you need to be willing. You need to go to your closet and find strength and wisdom. It's really the solution to about everything. You want to be better? If you want to be a better witness for your children, whether they're lost or saved, go be alone with God. And you want to be more bold in your ability to share the gospel while you're at work or elsewhere, go be alone with God. You want to know more about the Word of God, go be alone with God. You're overwhelmed beyond all imagination, go be alone with God. Alone with God is where you need to be. I say I'd encourage you to do it. I exhort you to do it. Not that the authority comes from me, but I demand you to do it because God commands that you be alone with Him. This will be the message. Well, for a verse of invitation.